It was a crisp autumn morning when Sarah, a woman in her early 60s, found herself standing at the doorstep of her own home. The sun cast a warm glow on the golden leaves as they drifted from the trees, but her heart was heavy. Her adoptive son, Daniel, had just kicked her out of the house she had lived in for decades. "You're not welcome here anymore," Daniel had said, his voice cold, devoid of any empathy. The words hit her like a slap in the face. She had always known that their relationship had been strained in recent years, but she never thought it would come to this. Sarah was stunned. This was the son she had raised, the child she had taken in when he had nowhere else to go. He was now a successful businessman, yet his success had come at a cost. His relationship with his mother. Sarah had always been proud of Daniel's achievements. She had sacrificed so much for him, working long hours at a local diner, taking on multiple jobs just to provide for him, to give him a better life. She never minded the late nights, the exhaustion. It was all worth it because she believed in him. She wanted him to have every opportunity she never had, and for a long time it seemed like her sacrifices were paying off. Daniel was becoming the man she had hoped for, kind, intelligent, and successful. But that was before everything changed. She could still remember the day she adopted him. He was just a small boy, barely 6 years old, with big, hopeful eyes. His past was dark, and his future uncertain, but Sarah was determined to give him a stable home. She never expected it would be such a struggle, that being a mother would require so much from her. Emotionally, financially, physically. But she did it, and she did it with love. But now, after all these years, after all the sacrifices, she was being thrown away as though she were nothing more than an inconvenience. "Get out of my life, Sarah," Daniel had spat, his face contorted in anger. "I don't need you anymore." Sarah had no idea where all of this had come from. Yes, they had disagreements, but nothing that would explain this level of betrayal. She hadn't even been given the chance to understand what had happened. One moment, they were sharing a meal, laughing about old memories, and the next, Daniel was kicking her out of the house she had once called home. Standing outside her house, Sarah couldn't help but wonder what had changed. Why had Daniel turned on her like this? It was more than just a disagreement. It felt like a betrayal. She had done everything for him, and yet, this was how he repaid her. It was a cruel twist of fate, but Sarah was not one to give up easily. She had always been resilient, and though her heart ached, she knew she couldn't let this defeat her. As she stood there, looking at her empty home, Sarah's thoughts shifted. She had lived in that house for so long. The walls had memories. Memories of laughter, of tears, of struggles, and of triumphs. This was her sanctuary, and now she had been cast out. But the truth was, Sarah had something that Daniel didn't know about. A secret hidden right beneath his nose. For years, Sarah had kept this secret hidden, buried deep in the walls of her home. It was a treasure, something Daniel would never have guessed in a million years. He had always assumed she was just an ordinary woman, struggling to make ends meet, doing the best she could. But there was more to Sarah than anyone realized. She had amassed a fortune of $9.8 million, hidden in a series of bank accounts, secret investments, and carefully guarded assets. It wasn't a fortune she had earned through luck or anything dishonest. It was the result of years of careful planning, shrewd investments, and strategic moves. No one, not even Daniel, had ever suspected the truth. She had always kept her wealth hidden, convinced that if Daniel ever knew about it, he would become greedy, and the dynamic of their relationship would change. And now, as she stood outside, alone and betrayed, she realized that the time for hiding was over. As the door slammed behind her, she realized that everything she had built could be at risk. But more than that, she realized that she now had the power to take control of her own fate. The truth was, Sarah was far from helpless. She had fought for everything she had, and this betrayal would not be the end of her story. Before we dive deeper into Sarah's journey, make sure to hit the like button, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more intriguing stories like this one. As Sarah walked away from the house, the cold wind biting at her skin, she couldn't help but think about the life she had built. one that had suddenly crumbled under the weight of her son's betrayal. The pain in her chest was almost unbearable, but in the midst of it all, a strange sense of clarity began to form in her mind. She had spent so many years hiding the truth, living under the radar, but now everything had changed. The world seemed like a different place now, and Sarah was no longer willing to play by anyone's rules, least of all Daniel's. She found herself standing on the sidewalk, unsure of where to go next. She had no home, no family to turn to. It was just her and the weight of her secret. For a long time, Sarah had kept the truth about her fortune to herself. But now, that secret could be her ticket to freedom, to taking back control of her life. As she made her way to a nearby cafe, Sarah sat down at a small table by the window, her mind racing. She knew she had to act fast. Daniel would come looking for her. He would want answers, and he would stop at nothing to get them. But what could he do? He had no idea what she was capable of, what she had hidden away. In the years that Sarah had lived in her home, she had never let anyone get too close to her personal affairs. She had always kept her financial matters under lock and key, making sure that no one could access her accounts or know where her wealth was hidden. But now, as she sat in the cafe, she couldn't help but wonder if her careful secrecy had been her undoing. Had her isolation caused her to misjudge Daniel's character? Had she been too trusting in the beginning, believing that her son would always be loyal? Sarah had no answers, but she knew that she couldn't afford to waste any more time. She needed to figure out her next move. She took a deep breath and opened her purse, pulling out a small leather notebook that she had kept for years. Inside, it contained the details of her investments, her secret bank accounts, and the exact location of her hidden fortune. For years, it had been her security blanket, a source of comfort in a world that had always felt unpredictable. But now it felt like a lifeline. She ran her fingers over the pages, tracing the neat handwriting that detailed every step she had taken to accumulate her wealth. It hadn't been easy. There had been sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and countless risks. But Sarah had always trusted her instincts, and they had never failed her. The money wasn't just a result of chance. It was the product of years of careful planning and an uncanny ability to spot opportunities that others had missed. But now she had to make a choice. Should she keep hiding the truth, or should she confront Daniel and risk everything? The thought of facing her son, of admitting that she had been keeping such a huge secret from him, made her stomach turn. She had never wanted to keep him in the dark. She had always intended to share the wealth with him one day, to ensure that he would be taken care of. But that day had never come, and now it seemed like it never would. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone buzzing on the table. It was a text message from an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment before opening it. The message was short, but it made her heart race. "I know what you're hiding. Don't think you can run from this." The words sent a chill down her spine. Who could it be? How did they know? Sarah's mind raced as she tried to make sense of it. Was it Daniel, already looking for her? Or was it someone else? Someone who had been keeping an eye on her for longer than she realized? Her thoughts were spinning, and she had no answers. But one thing was clear. Her life was about to take a turn she hadn't expected. Whoever this person was, they knew something that could change everything. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the text message. The words seemed to burn into her mind, sending her thoughts spiraling in every direction. "I know what you're hiding. Don't think you can run from this." Who could it be? How did they know? The possibilities were endless, and the fear of the unknown was gnawing at her. She had kept her secret hidden for so long, carefully guarded, carefully protected. But now someone knew. Someone had uncovered the truth, and that someone was sending a clear message. No one keeps secrets forever. She quickly glanced around the cafe, half expecting someone to be watching her, to see a familiar face in the crowd. But there was nothing, just the hum of conversation, the clinking of cups, and the distant sound of the espresso machine. Still, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Whoever had sent the message had to know more than just her whereabouts. They had to know something about her secret, something that no one else had ever discovered. She typed a quick reply, "Who is this?" Seconds ticked by as she waited for a response. She couldn't help but wonder if this was just some sick prank, or if someone really had uncovered her carefully guarded secret. But then the phone buzzed again. "You'll find out soon enough. Trust me, you won't be able to hide from this forever." Sarah's stomach dropped. It was clear that this wasn't just a coincidence. Whoever was behind these messages was watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now she had to act fast. She had no idea who this person was or what they wanted, but one thing was for certain. They knew about the money. Her hands trembled as she placed the phone back into her purse. The silence in the cafe felt suffocating now, as though the walls were closing in around her. She took a deep breath and tried to steady herself. She couldn't panic. She had faced tougher situations before. She had been through hell and back in her life. But this was different. This wasn't just a simple problem she could solve with her usual calm demeanor. This was a threat, one that could unravel everything she had worked so hard for. Suddenly, Sarah realized that her next steps were more crucial than ever. She had to find out who was behind these messages, and she had to do it quickly. The thought of confronting Daniel was still too painful, too raw, but she couldn't ignore the possibility that he was involved in all of this. After all, he had been the one to kick her out of her home. What if he had somehow discovered her secret and was using this as a way to manipulate her? It seemed impossible, but Sarah couldn't ignore the possibility. Her mind raced as she considered her options. She could go to the police, but that would draw even more attention to the situation. She could reach out to her lawyer, but that would take time, and time was something she didn't have. Whoever was behind the messages was already ahead of her, and she couldn't afford to waste any more of it. As the clock ticked on, Sarah made up her mind. She wasn't going to let this person control her life. She would fight back, and she would do whatever it took to protect her fortune and her future. With newfound resolve, Sarah stood up, paid for her coffee, and walked out of the cafe. Her next move was clear. She was going to take control of this situation, no matter what it took. But first, she had to find out who was behind the threat. And Sarah was no stranger to taking risks. She had done it her whole life, and this time would be no different. If you're curious to see what happens next, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. This story is just getting started, and you won't want to miss what comes next. The cool night air hit Sarah as she walked through the quiet streets, her mind whirling with questions. Who could be behind the threatening messages? And why now, after all these years of secrecy? She thought about Daniel, about the tension between them. But could he really be the one to expose her? Could he be the one sending these messages? The thought was almost too painful to entertain. But there was no denying the possibility. He had always been ambitious. Perhaps his ambition had finally clouded his judgment. The idea that Daniel, her own son, might be the one behind all this made Sarah's stomach twist in knots. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something, that there was a bigger picture she wasn't seeing. Sarah's mind flashed back to the years of her secret investments, her careful financial planning, the painstaking steps she had taken to secure her wealth. She had always been so meticulous, so careful about keeping everything hidden, believing that as long as Daniel remained in the dark, no one else would suspect. But now the walls seemed to be closing in on her. She had worked so hard to protect her fortune, but the cracks were beginning to show. She pulled out her phone again, scrolling through the messages from the unknown number. The words still burned in her mind. "I know what you're hiding. Don't think you can run from this." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Whoever this person was, they were not just after her money. They wanted something more. They wanted power. And if they could get to Sarah, they could get to anyone. As she walked, Sarah's eyes narrowed. She had to think strategically. She wasn't going to let herself be caught off guard again. Whoever was behind this, whoever was threatening her, was not going to take her down easily. The next day, Sarah took matters into her own hands. She started looking through her past contacts. Old friends, acquaintances, and even business partners. Anyone who might know about her wealth or the secrets she had kept hidden. But nothing stood out. No one seemed to know anything about the money she had so carefully guarded. That was when it hit her. The person sending the messages wasn't someone from her past. It wasn't a disgruntled associate or a jealous ex-business partner. It was someone who had recently entered her life, someone who had gained access to her life, her home, her secrets. Sarah had always been cautious about who she trusted, but in recent months, she had let her guard down. She had started opening up to new people, and there had been a few occasions where she had let her vulnerability show. Had she shared more than she realized? Her mind raced as she retraced the events of the past few months. There was a dinner party she had attended, a few weeks before the messages started. A man had been there, someone she barely knew, but had struck up a conversation with her. He seemed harmless at the time, just a friendly face in the crowd. But what if he had been more than that? What if he had been watching her, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike? With a newfound sense of urgency, Sarah decided to find this man. She had to know more. He might be the key to understanding who was behind the threats, and why her secret was now in danger of being exposed. She began asking around, gathering information, and piecing together the puzzle. It wasn't long before she found out his name, Lucas, a name that meant nothing to her at first, but now it seemed like the only clue she had. Lucas was someone who had quickly ingrained himself in her social circle, someone who had made his way into her life without her realizing the danger he posed. Now, Sarah was determined to find him, to confront him, and to uncover the truth once and for all. Sarah wasted no time. She had a name now, Lucas. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, but she still didn't have all the answers. What did he want? Why had he infiltrated her life so easily? She spent the next few days digging into Lucas's background, asking around her social circle, trying to connect the dots. She found out that Lucas had recently come into town and started attending events in her social circle, making connections with wealthy individuals. He had a reputation for being charming, persuasive, and unassuming, qualities that made him a perfect candidate for someone who could gather information without anyone suspecting his true intentions. It wasn't long before Sarah found out that Lucas had been involved in several shady business dealings, though nothing had been proven. His name had come up in whispers, but no one dared to confront him. He was too smooth, too well-connected. It was as if no one could touch him. But Sarah wasn't like everyone else. She wasn't going to let this man get away with threatening her. One evening, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She called a private investigator she had worked with in the past and arranged a meeting with him. They discussed Lucas's connections, his whereabouts, and everything they knew about him. It was time to confront him directly, to put an end to the threats once and for all. The investigator gave Sarah a list of places where Lucas might be. There was one bar in particular, a secluded spot where he had been known to frequent. It wasn't the type of place Sarah would normally visit, but tonight, it was her only lead. When Sarah arrived, the place was dimly lit, with a quiet, almost eerie atmosphere. She could feel the tension in the air as soon as she walked in. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on a man sitting at the far end of the bar. It was Lucas. He looked the same, charming, unassuming, with a casual air about him. But to Sarah, he looked like a predator. Taking a deep breath, Sarah walked over to the bar, her heart pounding in her chest. She took a seat next to him, and for a moment, they just sat in silence. She could feel the weight of the moment, the tension between them. Lucas turned to her, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. Well, if it isn't Sarah," he said, his voice smooth and controlled. "What brings you here tonight?" Sarah didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I know what you've been doing," she said, her voice steady but laced with anger. "I know you've been threatening me. I know you've been watching me. And I want to know why." Lucas's smile faltered for just a second, but then he regained his composure. "You're not as subtle as you think, Sarah," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You've been hiding a lot more than you realize." Sarah leaned in closer, her eyes locked on his. "What do you want from me, Lucas? Why are you doing this?" He took a sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're not as important as you think you are," he said, his voice cold. "But your secret is, and it's worth a lot more than you think." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. He knew about the money. He knew about everything. But how? "I'm not going to let you use me," she said, her voice firm. I'm not going to let you threaten me. Lucas chuckled, shaking his head. You don't have a choice, Sarah. You've been playing this game for too long, and now it's time for you to pay the price. You'll either give me what I want, or you'll lose everything. For the first time, Sarah felt a flicker of fear, but she quickly smothered it. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her. She had spent too many years building her life, building her fortune. She wasn't about to let some stranger take it all away. You're wrong, she said, her voice steady. I'm not afraid of you. Lucas's eyes glinted with amusement, but he could sense the resolve in Sarah's voice. He wasn't used to people standing up to him. This wasn't going the way he had planned. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the silence heavy with unspoken tension. Then, without another word, Sarah stood up and walked out of the bar, leaving Lucas sitting there, his expression unreadable. The night air felt colder now as Sarah walked away from the bar. Her pulse was still racing, but she was no longer afraid. The confrontation with Lucas had been tense, but it had also been eye-opening. She had stood her ground, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was in control of the situation. But as Sarah walked down the dimly lit street, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was far from over. Lucas's words echoed in her mind. You'll either give me what I want, or you'll lose everything. What did he mean by that? What exactly did he want? Was it her money? Was it something else? The uncertainty gnawed at her, and she couldn't help but feel like there was a bigger scheme unfolding around her, one that she wasn't fully aware of. As she reached her car, Sarah's phone buzzed again. She hesitated for a moment before checking it, fearing that it was another message from Lucas. But when she looked at the screen, her stomach dropped. It wasn't from Lucas. It was from Daniel. We need to talk. I know about the money. I know you've been hiding it. Meet me at the house. Now. The message hit her like a ton of bricks. Daniel knew. He had found out. She had tried to protect him from the truth, but now, it seemed like the secret was out. She didn't know how he had discovered it, whether it was through Lucas or some other means, but the fact remained. Her son, the one person she had trusted above all others, was now involved in this twisted game. Sarah's mind raced as she debated her next move. She could go to the house, confront Daniel, and explain everything to him. But that would put her at a disadvantage. She had no idea what kind of hold Lucas might have over him, and the last thing she wanted was to walk into a trap. She looked at her phone again, contemplating the message. What did Daniel want? Did he really expect her to just hand over the money? Or was this some kind of manipulation? Sarah had to think carefully. She couldn't afford to make another mistake. With a heavy heart, she made her decision. She wasn't going to play into their hands. She couldn't let herself be dragged into a web of deceit, no matter how much her love for Daniel made her want to trust him. Instead of heading to the house, Sarah called her lawyer. She needed to be prepared for whatever was coming next. It was time to take action, to ensure that she wasn't caught off guard again. Her lawyer, a sharp and experienced professional, assured her that she was doing the right thing. They would take every necessary step to protect her assets and ensure that no one, least of all Lucas or Daniel, could take advantage of her. Get some rest, Sarah, the lawyer advised. We'll deal with this. But as Sarah hung up the phone, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had spent so long protecting her wealth, but now, everything seemed to be slipping away. She wasn't just fighting for her money anymore. She was fighting for her future, for her peace of mind, and she wasn't about to let anyone take that from her. The days that followed were a blur for Sarah. She had expected the situation to escalate, but nothing could have prepared her for the psychological toll it took on her. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart would race, half expecting it to be a threat, half hoping it was some kind of breakthrough. But each message seemed to drive her deeper into uncertainty. She couldn't stop thinking about Daniel. The fact that he had found out about the money left her with a deep sense of betrayal. She had worked so hard to shield him from this secret, believing that keeping him in the dark was the best thing for both of them. But now, she was starting to question everything. Had she made a mistake? Was Daniel's resentment really about the money? Or was it something deeper, something that had been festering for years? She remembered the days when he was just a boy, the struggles they went through together, the bond they shared. Sarah never intended to keep him in the dark forever. But now, she was starting to see that perhaps her silence had created a wedge between them. She had always believed that love would be enough, that honesty would come in time. But time was running out. Her mind kept returning to Lucas, how he had weaseled his way into her life so easily. He was the perfect foil to everything she had worked for, a man with charm and deceit in equal measure. But Sarah was no fool. She had a wealth of life experience, and now it was time to use it. It was time to turn the tables. The next few days were a whirlwind. Sarah spent every waking hour gathering evidence, going over her finances with a fine-tooth comb, and making sure that every asset was protected. She knew that Lucas and Daniel were working together, whether knowingly or not. They both wanted the same thing, access to her wealth. But Sarah wasn't going to let them win. She would outsmart them. She had to. One evening, she decided to take a different approach. She called Daniel, hoping to catch him off guard. She needed answers, and she needed them now. The phone rang a few times before he picked up. "Mom!" His voice was cold. "I told you to meet me. Daniel, I don't know what you think you know, but this has gone too far," Sarah said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm not going to let you manipulate me, or let anyone else do it either." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. She could hear his breathing, his hesitation. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't want it to be like this," Daniel said, his voice softer now. "I didn't want to push you out. But when I found out about the money, everything changed. I felt like I didn't know who you were anymore." Sarah's heart sank. "Daniel, you've always known me. I've done everything for you." "I know, Mom," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you kept this from me. You kept me in the dark. And it made me feel like I wasn't enough. Like you didn't trust me." Sarah felt a sharp pang of guilt, but she quickly pushed it aside. "I never meant to hurt you. I did what I thought was best." There was another long silence. Then Daniel spoke again, his tone more resolute. "Tell me the truth, Mom. How did you get the money? What is it that you're hiding?" Sarah closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. This was the moment she had feared. But there was no turning back now. She had to tell him the truth, no matter how much it hurt. "I didn't keep it from you to hurt you, Daniel," she began, her voice steady. "I did it because I was protecting you. I didn't want you to get caught up in the greed and the pressure that comes with money. I didn't want it to change you. You could have trusted me." Daniel's voice cracked, the anger returning. "You could have let me in. But instead, you kept me out." "I did what I thought was right," Sarah replied softly. "But I'm not keeping anything from you anymore. The truth is, I've been careful. I've invested, saved, and built something over the years. It's not about the money, Daniel. It's about security, and about having something to fall back on when everything else fails." Daniel was silent for a moment, the weight of the words settling in. Sarah could feel the tension hanging in the air. "Mom, I don't know what to say." "Say whatever you need to," Sarah said, her voice calm. "But this isn't just about us anymore. There are people who know, people who want what I've built. And they'll stop at nothing to get it." The realization hit Daniel like a ton of bricks. "You mean Lucas?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she let the silence stretch, allowing the gravity of the situation to sink in. The silence on the phone was deafening. Sarah could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air, each one sinking deeper into Daniel's heart. She had never intended for things to reach this point, but here they were, caught in a dangerous web of lies, threats, and betrayal. Daniel's voice, once filled with anger, now sounded hollow. "How could I have been so blind?" he muttered. "I thought I knew you, Mom. But now I see. I was just another pawn in your game." Sarah's heart twisted at his words. She had tried to protect him, but in doing so, she had inadvertently created the very distance she feared. He was right in some ways. She had kept him in the dark, but not because she didn't trust him. She had done it to shield him from the very thing that was now tearing them apart: the greed, the hunger for power, and the insatiable desire to control everything. You were never a pawn to me, Daniel, Sarah said softly. You were always my son. I did what I thought was best. But you never trusted me enough to tell me the truth, Daniel replied, his voice thick with emotion. You thought I would be like them, like Lucas. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt the full weight of her actions. She had built walls around herself, around her secrets, and in doing so, she had pushed away the one person she had tried so hard to protect. I didn't want you to become like them, she said quietly. I didn't want you to get tangled up in their lies. But I see now. I've made mistakes too. Daniel didn't respond right away. He was quiet, but Sarah could hear him breathing, trying to make sense of it all. Finally, he spoke again, his voice shaky but resolute. I don't know if I can forgive you for this, Mom, he said. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. You kept me in the dark. And now it feels like everything we had was a lie. Sarah felt a sharp pang in her chest, but she didn't let it show. She had to be strong, even if it meant facing the consequences of her actions. I understand, she whispered. But I need you to know, Daniel, that I did it because I love you. I always have, and I always will. There was another long pause. Sarah could feel her chest tightening, each breath coming harder than the last. She had said everything she needed to say, but the damage had been done. She had lost Daniel's trust, and now she had to find a way to regain it. But just as she was about to speak again, a chilling thought crossed her mind. What if this wasn't just about the money? What if Lucas was using Daniel against her, playing on his insecurities and turning him against her for his own gain? Suddenly, the phone buzzed again. It was another message, this time from an unknown number. You've lost the only ally you had left. Now it's just you and me, and I always win. The words sent a wave of nausea through Sarah. It was Lucas again. He had somehow turned Daniel against her, and now he was making his move. The game was no longer just about her fortune. It was about power, control, and manipulation. Her heart raced as she stared at the screen, realizing the depth of the betrayal. Daniel was no longer on her side. He had become a pawn in Lucas's game, just as she had feared. And now, she was left alone to face the consequences. Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she set her phone down on the table. Her gaze locked on the words that had just appeared on the screen. You've lost the only ally you had left. Now it's just you and me, and I always win. Those words felt like ice in her veins. The message wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war. Lucas had made his move, and now he had taken her son, Daniel, away from her. The betrayal stung deeper than anything she had ever experienced. The quiet room around her seemed to grow heavier, filled with the weight of what had just transpired. Everything she had worked for, everything she had fought to keep hidden, now felt as though it was slipping through her fingers. But there was one thing Sarah knew for certain. She wasn't going to let it go down like this. Lucas had underestimated her. He thought that with Daniel on his side, he could break her. But Sarah had one thing that no one could take from her: her resilience. She took a deep breath, pushing the swirling thoughts aside. The first step was clear. She needed to regroup. She needed to fight back, but she had to be smart. She had lived her life protecting her wealth, making sure that no one could access it. But now, Lucas wasn't just threatening her money. He was threatening her family, her legacy, and her peace of mind. This was about control. Without wasting another moment, Sarah picked up her phone again, dialing the number of her lawyer. He had been her trusted ally for years, and she knew that if anyone could help her navigate this treacherous situation, it was him. Mr. Carter, she began, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. It's time to make our move. I need you to prepare for a fight. Her lawyer, who had always been calm under pressure, immediately picked up on the urgency in her voice. What happened? He asked, his tone serious. Lucas, Sarah replied, her voice firm. He's been manipulating Daniel, and now he's come for everything. I need you to help me protect my assets. I don't care how we do it, legally or otherwise, but it ends now. Understood. We'll take all the necessary steps to make sure he can't touch anything, Mr. Carter said. "You're not alone in this, Sarah." A small but steady wave of relief washed over Sarah. She was no longer fighting this battle by herself. There were people she could trust, people who had the resources and the skills to ensure that Lucas didn't succeed. As the conversation ended, Sarah set the phone down, her mind racing. Lucas had just made a huge mistake. He had underestimated the depth of her resolve. The game wasn't over, not by a long shot. But there was more to consider. Sarah knew that Lucas wouldn't back down easily. He had already shown just how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. And now it was her turn. She wasn't just fighting for her wealth anymore. She was fighting for everything she had worked for. Her dignity, her peace, and the future she had carefully built. And Sarah wasn't about to let some manipulative, power-hungry man tear it all apart. The following days were filled with action, and the tension in Sarah's life seemed to reach a boiling point. Every step she took had to be calculated. The stakes were higher than ever, and Sarah knew that the next move would be crucial. But one thing was certain. She wouldn't let Lucas or anyone take control of her life. Sarah was ready for the final showdown. Lucas thought he had won, but she wasn't about to let him have the last word. The days that followed were marked by an eerie quietness, but Sarah knew better than to mistake silence for safety. Every moment, every breath, felt heavy with the pressure of impending action. Lucas had declared his intentions. He had made it clear that this was a battle for control, and he thought he held the upper hand. But Sarah wasn't about to let him win. Not now, not after everything she had fought for. She had already set the wheels in motion with her lawyer. Mr. Carter had swiftly put together a team of experts, financial advisors, security specialists, and investigators, who could track every movement Lucas made. It was clear that the manipulative man had underestimated just how prepared Sarah had been for this moment. He may have thought he was taking the power back, but he didn't know just how much Sarah was willing to do to protect everything she had. It was the late hours of the night when Sarah sat at her kitchen table, reviewing documents, and ensuring her assets were fortified in every way possible. The wealth she had carefully accumulated over the years wasn't just tied to physical assets. It was in accounts, investments, and safe houses spread across various countries. She had always been meticulous. Now, that meticulousness was her lifeline. Her phone buzzed. She checked it quickly and saw a message from her lawyer. "We've secured all legal loopholes. Lucas will not have access to anything." A small sense of reassurance washed over Sarah, but it didn't last long. While the financial battle was being handled, there was still the matter of Daniel. She hadn't spoken to him in days, and the distance between them felt like a chasm she wasn't sure she could cross. What had started as a disagreement about money had now turned into a conflict that threatened to tear apart the very foundation of their relationship. Sarah's mind returned to the past, back to the days when Daniel was a child, when she had first brought him into her home. She had raised him, loved him, and sacrificed so much to give him a future. All of that seemed to mean nothing now. Lucas had been clever, using Daniel's insecurities against him, twisting the truth and planting seeds of doubt. Sarah knew that she couldn't leave things unresolved. She had to confront Daniel, even if it meant facing the painful reality of what had transpired. It wasn't long before she made up her mind. She had to meet with Daniel. She couldn't let him continue to be a pawn in Lucas's game. She couldn't let him be manipulated any longer. But Sarah knew it wouldn't be easy. She had to approach him carefully, with love and understanding, but also with the strength to stand her ground. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. She picked up the phone and dialed Daniel's number. Her heart beat a little faster as she waited for him to pick up. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity, and when he finally answered, the tension in his voice was palpable. "Mom," he said, his tone distant and cold. "I didn't expect to hear from you." "I know we've had our differences, Daniel," Sarah began, her voice calm but firm. "But I need you to listen to me. I've been keeping things from you, yes, but it's not what you think. I never meant to hurt you." "I don't know what to believe anymore," Daniel replied, his voice tinged with frustration. "You've kept everything from me, and now I don't know who you are." "I've always been your mother, Daniel," Sarah said softly. "I've done everything I could for you. I wanted to protect you from the things that could hurt you. But now I see that I've only pushed you away." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Sarah could hear Daniel's breathing, a mixture of anger and pain. He was struggling with the truth, with the realization that his mother had kept secrets from him. But he also knew that there was more at play here, something deeper than just the money. "I don't want to fight anymore," Daniel finally said, his voice cracking. "But I can't just forget what's happened." "I'm not asking you to forget, Daniel," Sarah said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm asking you to trust me again. We can fix this together, but it's going to take time. It's going to take effort." For the first time in days, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. She hadn't lost him yet, and that, in itself, was a victory. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of emotions and action. Sarah had spoken to Daniel, but the words felt like a fragile bridge, barely holding up the weight of their fractured relationship. She knew that rebuilding trust wouldn't be easy, but it was a start. The conversation, although painful, had opened the door to healing. Now she had to face the real enemy, Lucas. Sarah knew that Lucas had been manipulating Daniel, using his vulnerabilities to his advantage. But what Sarah didn't realize was just how deeply Lucas had burrowed into their lives. He had played the long game, building a relationship with Daniel, slowly turning him against her. Every moment of tenderness he showed Daniel had been carefully crafted, designed to create a sense of loyalty in her son, all the while orchestrating his own gain. The more Sarah thought about it, the more the truth became clear. Lucas wasn't just after the money. He was after power, and Daniel was his key to unlocking it. It wasn't enough for him to steal her fortune. He wanted to control everything. Sarah had underestimated just how far Lucas was willing to go to get what he wanted. But now, Sarah knew she had to step up, not only for herself but for her son. In the days following her conversation with Daniel, Sarah focused on preparing for the inevitable showdown with Lucas. She had already consulted her lawyer, who was working around the clock to ensure that her assets remained secure. The legal team was assembling a solid case against Lucas, based on his manipulative behavior and the tactics he had used to gain influence over Daniel. But as Sarah was preparing for the next phase of the battle, she received another unexpected call. This time, it was from an anonymous number. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether to answer, but something in her gut told her that it was important. She picked up the phone. "Hello?" she said, her voice cautious but steady. "Sarah." The voice on the other end was smooth, calculating. "I think we need to talk." It was Lucas. "Why would I want to talk to you?" Sarah responded, her voice cold, though she could feel a knot tightening in her chest. "I think you know why," Lucas said, his tone dripping with arrogance. "You've made this a game of chess, but you're not thinking a few moves ahead. You're losing, Sarah, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Sarah's blood ran cold. He was taunting her, trying to undermine her confidence. But she wasn't about to back down. She knew that Lucas had tried to manipulate her, but now it was time for her to turn the tables. "You're wrong, Lucas," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not losing, and I'm not playing your game anymore. You're not going to control me, and you're not going to control Daniel." "Ah, Daniel," Lucas's voice turned condescending. "You really think you can protect him from the truth? You've spent your whole life lying to him, hiding the truth. He's already made his choice, Sarah. You're just too blind to see it." "I don't believe that," Sarah replied, her resolve hardening. "Daniel is stronger than you think, and I'll fight for him. I'll fight for everything I've worked for." Lucas chuckled darkly. "You'll fight, but you won't win. You're already too far behind." Before Sarah could respond, Lucas hung up. His words echoed in her mind, but she wasn't intimidated. The game had changed. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about power, and Sarah wasn't about to let Lucas take that from her. She had come too far. The next day, Sarah received a package delivered to her door. Inside, there was a single envelope, marked with the same anonymous handwriting that had appeared on her phone earlier. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it. Inside was a single photograph, a photo of Daniel looking distraught sitting with Lucas. It was a quiet moment, one that captured her son's vulnerability. And in the background, Sarah could see the faint outline of something that looked like a contract. The message was clear. Lucas was making his move, using Daniel to seal his victory. But Sarah wasn't going to let him get away with it. Sarah's heart raced as she stared at the photo in her hand. The image of Daniel sitting next to Lucas, looking disoriented and worn, was a punch to the gut. It felt like a clear declaration. Lucas wasn't just after her wealth. He had already begun his psychological manipulation of her son. The contract in the background was the final piece of the puzzle, confirming that Lucas had been preparing for this moment for much longer than Sarah had realized. But Sarah wasn't about to let him win. She had spent far too long building her life, her fortune, and her family to let someone like Lucas destroy everything. She carefully set the photo down, her mind already working through the next steps. She couldn't let Daniel remain under Lucas's control. She had to confront him, but this time it wouldn't be an emotional plea. It would be a fight for the truth, for Daniel to see past the manipulation. She knew that confronting Lucas would be dangerous, but Sarah wasn't afraid anymore. She had the law on her side, and now she had the resolve to confront the enemy head-on. She quickly called her lawyer, Mr. Carter. The team had been working relentlessly, gathering information about Lucas's business dealings, his financial connections, and his potential criminal activities. It wasn't just about her wealth anymore. It was about exposing Lucas for who he truly was, a manipulator, a liar, and someone who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. Mr. Carter, it's time, Sarah said, her voice strong. I need you to prepare everything for the final confrontation. I'm going to expose Lucas, and I'm going to get Daniel back on my side. This ends today. We're ready, Mr. Carter replied, his voice calm and confident. You've got the evidence, and we've built a solid case against Lucas. He won't be able to run from this. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation settle in her chest. The battle had been long, and it wasn't over yet. But now, it felt like the tide was turning. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore, and she had the resources to make sure Lucas paid for everything he had done. She glanced one last time at the photograph of Daniel and Lucas. The time for games was over. She had to act. The plan was in place, and Sarah was ready for the final showdown. That evening, Sarah made her way to the place where everything would come to a head. Lucas had arranged a meeting at one of his upscale, secluded properties, a place designed to intimidate, to show just how much control he had over the situation. But Sarah wasn't intimidated. She was ready. As she walked through the ornate hallway, she felt the tension building. She was on his turf now, and she knew that Lucas thought he was in charge. But Sarah had a few tricks left up her sleeve, and this time, she wasn't going to play by his rules. Lucas was already waiting for her in the spacious, dimly lit living room. He stood by the large windows, looking out at the sprawling estate. When he turned to face her, his smile was as cold as the night air. You finally decided to show up, he said, his voice laced with arrogance. I've had enough of your games, Lucas, Sarah replied, her voice steady but filled with conviction. I'm here to take control of my life again, and I'm going to make sure you never hurt anyone again. Lucas's smirk faltered for just a moment. He hadn't expected Sarah to come here prepared. He thought he still had the upper hand, but he was wrong. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about exposing him for the manipulative person he was and making sure he faced the consequences of his actions. You think you've won, Sarah? Lucas scoffed. You've been hiding in the shadows for far too long. You think you can stop me now? I'm not hiding anymore, Lucas, Sarah said, stepping forward. I've got everything I need to make sure you're finished. And this time, you won't be able to manipulate your way out of it. Lucas's expression shifted from confident to wary. He knew that Sarah had been too quiet, too careful, for too long. And now, he realized that she wasn't just fighting for money. She was fighting for everything that mattered. Don't be so sure of yourself, Lucas spat, his tone darkening. You've underestimated me, Sarah. You've always underestimated me. I'm done underestimating you, Sarah responded, pulling out a folder filled with evidence. emails, bank statements, and a copy of the contract that had appeared in the photo. She placed it on the table between them. This is your endgame, your lies, your manipulation. Everything is here. And now, it's time for you to face the consequences. For the first time, Lucas's confident mask began to crack. He reached for the folder, but Sarah held up a hand, stopping him. It's too late, Lucas, Sarah said, her voice unwavering. You've lost, and now you're going to pay for what you've done. The silence between them was deafening, but Sarah didn't flinch. She had made her move, and now the tables had turned. Lucas was cornered, and there was nothing he could do to escape. She turned and walked toward the door, knowing that the fight was finally over. But as she left, she could hear Lucas's angry voice behind her. It didn't matter. He was done, and she had won.